My vision for Africa is a simple one, is that we need to create a prosperous Africa. In an Africa where women are empowered, an Africa where there are no gender gaps, an Africa where kids go to school, an Africa that is prosperous, an Africa that is, stands on equal footing with the rest of its peers on other continents, and an Africa that becomes productive, continues to be innovative and vibrant. First of all, it will create jobs. And I think that this is, we need 16 million jobs a year on the continent, and the CFTA will clearly create more jobs. It will begin to create regional value chains. We see the numbers. It can add to Africa's GDP almost 55 billion. It could add to Africa's exports almost 60 billion. So clearly, not only is it going to create jobs, it's going to create a platform for innovation. It's going to create, I think the issue is when we talk about the continent, the innovative potential is so huge. We just need to sort of allow for that platform that would unleash it. And we believe that the CFTA is that platform that will give us, you know, the full potential of what the African youth, the African market, the African private sector can deliver. We do two or three things. The first is, as the Economic Commission for Africa, we work across the continent. We are one of the only institutions actually today that looks at Africa as a continent. And therefore we're in a privileged position, and we're really honored that the African Union and African member states have sort of taken us in as advisors on processes of development and how that can happen, how we can create innovative ways of financing, because a lot of this will require financing, innovative ways of financing this development, and then bringing global norms onto the continent. We do two things. One is we ensure that global norms come on the continent, but more importantly, that Africa's position, Africa's place, Africa's voice is also represented at the global level. So there is a lot of advocacy that we do. We also provide alternative ideas, alternative ways of getting to, today we're all trying to get to Agenda 2030. How can we help Africa achieve that? How can we support our member states as they do that? So that's really, I think we have this privileged position to be a member of a global institution, which is the United Nations, but sitting on the continent, working for, with, and to get alongside the continent gives us, you know, I think a strength that we can then take to the global world as representing Africa and ensuring that its position is protected. Listen, the CFTA is all about the private sector. It's all about saying, you know, how can you create jobs? We know that the public sector does not create jobs, and even if it did, it would not create nearly enough jobs to be able to absorb what we have today. And so the private sector is the one that tells us where the markets are. The private sector is the one that tells us what to regulate. The private sector essentially is the sort of discoverer. They're the ones who identify new market sectors. They're the ones who can bring, you know, the global goods into the continent. They're the ones who manufacture it, but they really are the fountain of innovation. And they are, today, when you look at sort of research and development across the world, a lot of it is happening in the private sector. So essentially, as we look at sort of what is the Africa of the future, we cannot define it. We don't know what it is, but we know that we cannot define it without having the private sector leading it and the public sector allowing for the regulation, allowing for the institutions that can harmonize and ensure that there is equity as you go forward. Public-private partnerships are an important part, particularly when we talk about infrastructure. Today, including in the West, a lot of the big infrastructure is still built in public-private partnerships, because we want to ensure, and that is part of the conversation that we're having today, is we want to ensure that we leave no one behind. If you only do the private sector, justifiably so, they have to look at the bottom line and profit. If you bring in the public sector, then we start looking at inclusive, sustainable growth and development. So most of the big infrastructure, most of the sort of last mile health, most of the last mile education will still be built by the public sector. But we know that there are models that can ensure that when you have both the public, we just talked about energy, you have both the public and the private sector, you can ensure that women in the rural areas do not continue to cook with, you know, combustible fossil fuels, but can get access to renewable cooking stoves, because the tariffs and the prices that you have at the urban areas with the private sector is something that then you can redistribute. Again, the CFTA is we are towards the maybe the middle of the road or the beginning of a new journey with the CFTA, but this started 20 years ago. And in the last 20 years, a lot has happened with the regional economic communities in West Africa, ECOWAS, in Southern Africa, SADC, in East Africa, the East African Community, which is now together with SADC created the COMESA. A lot of work has already been happening, and I think the CFTA is really building on that. But the advantage then is that we already have regional blocks. So we are not essentially trying to harmonize, over 50 countries. We're trying to now harmonize 5 or 6 regional blocks into one continental area. So there has been a lot of work that has allowed for the CFTA to be possible today with the speed at which it is going. And I think and so finally what we're going to try to do is work directly with the regional economic communities again to ensure that the implementation of the CFTA comes to being, because they are the ones who have been over the last 2 decades making sure that we build slowly the rules of origins, the dispute settlement systems, the trading systems. In the Southern Africa region, for example, they already built, financial systems that can speak to each other. There is interoperability, there are common clearing houses. And so we will learn from those as we build the broader system. I think it's 2 things. When you're doing huge and transformational changes like the CFTA, and we expect it to be transformational for the continent, you need consultation. And Nigeria, of course, being one of the larger manufacturing service powerhouses on the continent, has a constituency, I think, that needs to be consulted, needs to, provide its views. And I think one of the reasons why Nigeria didn't has not yet ratified the process is because they wanted to do these consultations. We are confident that Nigeria will finally do it, just like South Africa initially said we need to think about it. They have finally ratified. The same thing with Egypt that just ratified 2-3 days ago. So the bigger countries said we need to go back and consult with our private sector. We believe now, post the political cycle in Nigeria, that we will come back to the discussions, and hopefully between now and July, Nigeria will be part of the community of nations that signs the CFTA. There have been a lot of studies that show that when you have women in leadership, the policies that are put in place are more favorable for equitable and sustainable development. So I think that is the first thing, is that you can help ensure that, there's more gender parity. And secondly, it's just the visibility. I think the world, and particularly our continent, still needs women to be visible so that, you can give the younger girls that are coming up the encouragement and the ability to think that they too can do it. And finally, I think we have seen across the world that when women are in organizations, the organizations are more profitable, they are more innovative. And so my sense is that hopefully that we can bring all this to bear on our institutions. I must say that the Secretary General at the United Nations has already reached parity at the sort of senior level. We have 50-50 now with the women, and we're trying to ensure that. So we're proud as the UN to be one of the institutions that has parity. But it's once you have parity at the top levels, because what we see with sort of gender empowerment is the fact that, you need to build a bench. You must build a bench, because otherwise then if 2 people leave, then you go from 50% to 30% very quickly. So you really need to build a bench, and you can sort of continue to ensure that people come. And that starts with mentoring and creating and ensuring that there is more women at every level of the system that can, ensure, and that are very performing. And, as women, we work twice as hard, and we continue to work twice as hard. By the time we get to work, we've done, 3 jobs already, and so I think it's visibility, it's the privilege to be able to then mentor a few more, so that we have a lot more that come up. Be persistent, work really hard, be extremely prepared, because we always have to sort of earn the stage. We are never given the stage. And you can't earn it if you're not prepared. You can't earn it if you're not resilient. You may not get it the first time, but you have to keep trying. If you believe in the idea, then you must continue with it, because the minute you decide that you're going to stop believing in the idea, you've not only failed yourself, but you fail all the other women that are behind you. And believing and not succeeding the first time just requires you to become even stronger, even more sturdy, and to go back and work a little bit harder. I think there is proof, there is enough proof now that working sufficiently hard, harder than maybe the rest, but that should not be a cause for complaint. It should be a cause for saying, I can do this and I can get further. So really ensuring that you can work, but look around you, bring other people along with you as you do that, and then, be grateful for the support that you have from friends and family and mentors and managers and, good leaders that you have ahead of you.